Which book is considered a literary masterpiece, but you didn't like it at all? The Scarlet Letter. What's really interesting to me is how many of the books people are listing are the books we had to read. At this point, the top 10 or so top level comments are all books I had to read for various English classes. I wonder how much of that has to do with the inherent dislike of the books, because we never chose to read them. Great Expectations. It was long and overdrawn for a story that I didn't find compelling. Also, while reading it, it was pretty obvious that Dickens was paid by the word when writing it. Romeo and Juliet was an absolute nightmare to get through on the account that we read the entire thing aloud in class and the teacher corrected every single little mispronunciation. Given we'd never read Old Timmy English before, it took us about twice as long as it should have. War and Peace. Honestly, I've never felt so disconnected from a reading in my entire life, and that is counting the back of shampoo bottles. Can't bring myself to give a shit about any of the characters, even if Tolstoy himself got out of the grave and said, "Hey man, can you give it a try?" The Awakening by Kate Chopin. It was really well written, but oh my god, every single character was so unbelievably obnoxious and selfish that I hated reading every second of it. We have this book in my own country called Hunger Child. It is so boring, and I was forced to read it twice in school. I have it as a movie. I don't even think that one is worth to watch. Pretty much anything by Faulkner, because everything is a giant sentence with a bunch of superfluous words, like in this sentence that I'm typing out using an iPhone, that has a nice cover and that whispers to me when an interesting comment has occurred on Reddit, because I'm a Reddit user and perhaps one day I will have the wit to use brevity and come up with an excellent question for r/askreddit, but until that happens I, alas, will have to settle like river sediment for the banality of my comments. Moby Dick, because there was not enough dick. Shakespeare counts, right? Romeo and Juliet. I love Shakespeare. I love Macbeth, Hamlet, Twelfth Night, Julius Caesar, Merchant of Venice, etc. But Romeo and Juliet is a pointless story about incredibly stupid people. There's a quote by Mark Twain that summarizes my opinion on classics. He said that a classic was something that everybody wants to have read and nobody wants to read. Catcher in the Rye. It is the most pretentious, self-important site I've ever read, and I was once stuck on an island for 4 days with only Battlefield Earth to read. Great Expectations by Dickens. Pretty ironic that I had such high hopes. The Old and New Testament felt really preachy. No Ethan Frome. I think I had to read this in 8th grade. I probably loved reading more than most, but this was the book I remember most as a chore. The whole thing was a boring slog to get through, from the writing style to the melodramatic plot. I almost never participated in discussions in class, but I vividly remember going off on the teacher about how much I disliked reading it. Wuthering Heights. Ugh. Heart of freaking darkness for such a short novel. Man, it was a struggle to read. I thought Atlas Shrugged was cartoonish. The characters were so over the top it bordered on parody. The Fountainhead was the better book in every respect. 3 times I have tried to tackle Infinite Jest, and 3 times I have been stymied. I can read immense, dry tomes and make my way through just fine, but for some reason I always peter out about halfway through this bad boy. I know people who love it. I know I probably *SHOULD* love it. I'll probably give it one more try in 10 years and then set my copy on fire. On the Road by Jack Kerouac. The Beat Generation can shove it up their ass. The Great Gatsby. Lol, this has so many replies that I can't read the new ones anymore. Everything from the Romantic period. They were all paid by the word, and oh my fucking god, is it obvious? Ulysses. I know a lot of it is cultural stuff that made sense back in the early 20th century when Joyce wrote it, and that if I tried to understand it's a masterpiece, but I just can't get into it. Dracula. It's not a completely terrible book, it was just not what I was expecting and left me a bit disappointed. I was really excited to read it for a class in high school, but did not expect it to be in the format of journal entries. It just wasn't a style I particularly enjoyed. I can totally understand why it became such a classic though. It was almost like the Blair Witch Project of its time, like found footage in a way. Fahrenheit 451. I felt like the whole book was some sort of Reddit edgy meme. Everyone circle-jerking about how good it was, but felt like a big in joke about how we read books, not like those brainwash tools. Spoilers, when the main character goes off the wall and murders his boss and starts his run from the lore, I thought the book was just starting to go somewhere until it abruptly ended. The novel I purchased has tons of essays and opinion pieces printed after the story, so when the book just ended I thought I had another 100 pages to go and was confused. Edit. And yet somehow I was still offended at the movie's retelling of the story and how they figured a way to do it worse. The Turn of the Screw, considered one of the most influential early horror novels. It's an incredibly tough slog. I did finish it, and I get why it's influential, but the language used really made it hard for me to enjoy it. It was released in 1898, and reads like it was written in 1598. Wicked. I used to have friends that went on and on about how great the book and play was. I have no idea if the play is any good, but trying to get through the book turned out to be an impossibility for me. I got through her childhood and college years before giving up finally and returning the book to the library. The Alchemist. I always felt the applaud it received was exaggerated. I've tried to read Catch-22 for years. I tried reading the book, watching the movie, and I've tried the audiobook, and I have yet to get through any of them successfully. I just can't. It's just too obtuse for me, I guess. Edit. Based on all the passion here and the insistence on patience with the narrative, I'm going to give it another go and see it all the way through. Grapes of Wrath. Ugh. So much description of dust. Silas Marner. Jesus fuck me with the Cactus Christ. That was a dull read. Maybe it's not as much a classic as others on this list, but I consider this book the point I started losing interest in A levels. The Lord of the Rings. Those books go on forever. I'm shocked they were able to boil it down to just 3 movies. This will be unpopular, but Game of Thrones. Everybody loves it so much, and I just could not get more than about 40 pages into the first book. I've read a lot of shit that doesn't even qualify as writing, but the writing style in GOT was the worst. I really have never understood the love of the Catcher in the Rye. 100 Years of Solitude can't really get into it. Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice. Madame Bovary. Pages and pages describing every item on a table or in a room in excruciating detail do not make a good novel, nor does a protagonist that no sane or even remotely well-adjusted person could possibly identify with or like, who is also too dull and stupid to even be an interesting villain or anti-hero. Flaubert can take the sublime and blow it out his ass. As above. Heart of Darkness. The Catcher in the Rye, also The Last of the Mohicans. Michael Mann is a genius to make such an amazing movie out of that thing. Lolita, which I personally thought was boring and couldn't wait to finish it. That said, despite the fact that I didn't like it, I could still appreciate from reading it that Nabokov is a very talented writer, so at some point I'm going to give some of his other books a go. Wuthering Heights with Heathcliff, that little girl ghost, and all the whining about the moors seemed like a muddled laudanum dream. Hard to read, follow, and stay awake enduring. The Old Man and the Sea. Maybe I was too young to understand the actual point of the book, but as far as everything I've read so far, I really didn't care for it. I might read it again at some point to see if I can distinguish anything different I might have missed. Walden. I swear Thoreau made up 75% of those words. Estonian classic Tode Jaloigus. Everyone treats it as the Holy Bible when in reality it's like 400 pages of fucking with your neighbor and marsh drying. I enjoyed 1984 for the most part, but there's a part in it where it's literally a book inside a book that Winston reads in the novel. I found that part hard to get through, but apart from that I thought it was a pretty good book. I do not like Green Eggs and Ham. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. As I lay dying, my wife loves it, and I hated it. Last year I had to read a collection of short stories instead of tackling one big book. One of the stories was The Scholar Ibis. I'm not illiterate, nor do I hate literature. In fact, I love finding hidden meanings in things. However, this fucking story makes no goddamn sense. I tried to find some kind of meaning in every single paragraph. I had to bullshit my way through the essay just to make it seem like I understood anything about this story. This family has a kid named Doodle. Has weak and can't walk. The story is told from the perspective of Doodle's big brother. Now the big brother, I'll call him Sidhead, absolutely hates Doodle. If you personified the word oblised, you'd get Sidhead from toe to tip. Has embarrassed that Doodle can't walk. If I remember correctly, he contemplates killing Doodle at some point. Anyway, one day this family sees a scarlet ibis in their garden during dinner. It was blown off course by a storm. It's weak and sick, and it just dies right in front of them. Pretty fucked up, right? Well then, they make Doodle get up and drag the bird away to be buried. They're convinced it's a bad omen. Later, Sidhead and Doodle are caught outside in the storm. They were playing by the river and the storm came in and trapped them on the shore. Doodle and Sidhead hide under separate bushes from the storm. Now at this point, there is no indication that Doodle is going to just drop the fact dead. Absolutely no signs his condition is getting worse. Hell, Sidhead has been putting him through some kind of big brother bullying type of physical therapy, and at this point Doodle can walk, but Doodle just fucking dies. Has under a bush, has in a storm. There's something red on his chest. He just dies out of nowhere. My entire class was dumbfounded. Was it a berry bush? Did he stain his chest, prick himself, and decide to end it right there? Heart attack. Then why is there blood on his chest? I can't find a single meaning in this story other than don't be a dick to your disabled brother. Otherwise he might die in a storm foreshadowed by a dumb bird. I have too many feelings about this story.